other, capital O other, constitutes a Promethean theft. Section 4.1. Marxist materialism and cultural matter. Looking eastward, a feminine principle underlying cultural being was empirically appointed to the Marxist school, and perhaps best exemplified by Mother Russia's favorite son, Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky and his followers evoked a conscious sort of meaning mediation, serving as a contrast to the moon-like and medial aspect of Prometheus. In light of Vygotsky's social-cultural theory of mind, Prometheus is situated on the border between our natural phylogenetic endowment and the earliest signs of cultural being in the world that Vygotsky evinced. As crafter of earth and chief ambassador of Western cultures, Prometheus embodies the conjunctio of his mother's blended aspect. Gaia Themis suggests a complementary relationship between nature and culture, respectively. In a sense that transcends the Greek ontology, Marxist materialism evinces this distinctly feminine conjunctio of nature and culture. Section 4.2. Hermes and Prometheus in light of Themis. The capacity to navigate between the natural and the cultural realm, represented by Gaia Themis, is pure gold, though it is likely to be undermined so long as archetypal psychology stays within a hermetic stance of this borderline. Prometheus also has a rightful place here. Though the analogy may not be perfect, let us substitute the natural cultural with an unconscious conscious continuum. According to Karenyi, Prometheus and Hermes share a very similar position here. Quote, Hermes too is nocturnal and like the moon, a wanderer, but he belongs to the rising light of the sun and of life, and has nothing to do with the dark side of life, unquote. This is not to say that Hermes' mediational skills do not conduct to the unconscious, as well as the conscious side of life. Indeed, López-Pedraza has made a very convincing case to the contrary. However, he is only the humble messenger, not the tortured existential anti-hero and boundary pusher that Prometheus represents. Only Prometheus, primordial product of titanic nature and Olympian culture, has the archetypal energy to inform the inter- and intra-psychological debates and dialogues of the Athenian Golden Age. If ours, as López-Pedraza and Hellman insist, is the Titanic Age, then the solutions may arguably center on the natural cultural dialogue set in motion by Themis and enacted through Prometheus's ongoing negotiations with the autocratic and patriarchal Zeus order. Section 4.3. Themis and envisioning a feminine other that blends the binary. Applying some forensic detective work, we find Themis in the feminine other of the dominant Western narrative, appearing sporadically in polytheistic pockets. Hellman's critique of Western history includes the assertion that the plurality of mythos was not obliterated by the rise of philosophy in classical Greece. This is easy to point out. Consider Socrates, for example. Though he focused on the one, his rhetorical spirals drew from the polytheistic many, as conveyed in the connected, grounded wisdom of Diotima. One might argue that Diotima, as characterized in the Symposium, reflects a primordial feminine principle that points to Themis. Construed as psyche, both Hellman and López-Pedraza would argue that Gaia Themis is polytheistic many, which covers the full range of Great Mother archetypes. In this continuum, we may add Demeter and Rhea, for example, among other updated varieties. Was not obliterated by the rise of Western rationalism. It went underground. This primordial Gothic feminine, insofar as such a thing may be articulated, might postulate the following methodological reversal of the patriarchal epistemology. For every analytical reduction, there exists a complementary synthesis. As Karenyi puts it, Gaia Themis is, quote, earth whose form is one, whose name is many, unquote, Choreographing her courettes around the analytical reduction, she spins a multifaceted cultural complex, a myth. As a caretaker of the cultural many, Themis may be empirically absent, but, to borrow from Rowland, the ghost of her feminine otherness is arguably everywhere in Prometheus Bound. As we open up a discussion of what it means to blend the binary, it's important to bear in mind that this dialogical many, infused with the feminine and postmodern pluralism, should not be conceived in opposition to the one. If we accept Prometheus as that one, then the connection is complementary, as opposed to the classic notion of the one construed in the binary's patriarchal cogito. I think, therefore I am. The binary belongs to the dialectic. There is no conjunctio energy in the dialectic, as everything on the other side of the polarity is ingested through logical negation into the one. Giegerich sense of the one as a Hegelian incarnation of the soul demonstrates how the one is arguably biased toward patriarchal monotheism. According to Giegerich, male and female, as constituents of a syzygy, are reduced to the notion of a, quote, unity of unity and difference, in which the soul tautologically speaks about itself, its own self-same nature, unquote. A core aspect of this notion centers on breaking out of the unio naturalis. Throughout his work, we know that this breakout involves laying waste to the Great Mother, the naturals, and for that the glue of mythos. All of this has been logically subsumed, according to Giegerich, under the move upward and outward into pure techno-logic. To borrow from the filmic realm, Ridley Scott's dark goo has been effectively engineered. Jungian scholar Claremont de Castillejo offers an alternative feminine synthetic for Giegerich's analytic. She posits a diffuse knowing rooted in the feminine, which may be recast for purposes of the present discussion as a wisdom of the many, which seeks to connect and multiply meanings. A key ingredient, which was alluded to earlier, centers on reclaiming the valuing aspect of the feeling function, without losing an appreciation for the feminine roots of valuing and diffuse knowing, and open to the possibility of something even more organic and sublime that the Titaness evinces, we nonetheless turn to a post-gendered thematization of Themis. Any substantive discussion of blending the binary must face the knowledge that gender is not limited to biology. It is perhaps that very monocular lens that has held the feminine hidden for so long in the deep structure of the Western psyche. Section 5. From Sub-Theme to Themis, the Risks and Rewards of Thematizing. The Themis has no direct literal presence in Ischos' drama should come as no surprise. Following Rowland's detective work, we're on the trail of the sublime Gothic, or ghostly feminine. At the same time, there arises a danger in thematizing Themis, a potential violence inherent in forcing her manifestation. Having just speculated about her contribution to the feminine counter-narrative to Western patriarchy and a dialogic subversion of the binary's dialectic, we've already ventured into this dangerous terrain. Not having any other recourse, the detective proceeds with caution, aware of the risk of imposing essential truths that endanger his or her fragile intricacies. We begin with this Mother Nature aspect, which is low-hanging fruit for countering the patriarchal meta-narrative. Whether as Eve or as the Madonna, the monotheistic Great Mother is effectively extricated from cultural being. The latter may arguably occupy a mediatrix position as immortalized in the medieval cantigas, where she is often depicted as a legal advocate on behalf of sinners before the divine court, as the Madonna. However, she is depicted as a secretary or social worker for Christ, or arguably the ultimate defense attorney for all mankind. It's worth considering the possibility that Themis, not Zeus, might serve as the very archetypal glue of cultural being in the world. This requires reading between the lines and calls us back to Aeschylus's drama. The faithful detective knows not to look at each of the characters as an isolated I, but rather as its own chorus of sorts, or as the polytheistic many who counter the monotheistic one. Taken together, the softened males, Hephaestus, Hermes, Okeanos, the tender consoling ocean nymphs, and Io, and the moon, all confirm that the feminine is not literally but rather logically present. Gier breaks down the related points of wisdom imparted to Prometheus, all of which we can place within the feminine archetype. Number 1, Oceanus warns of his rage. 2, Hermes of his insanity and lack of self-control. And 3, the chorus, the Oceanids, or Canids, upbraids him for his stubbornness. Such instruction is arguably orchestrated under the Great Mother archetype constituted as Themis, manifested in the connected, intuitive, and social intelligence rooted in the Titaness's far-seeing, far-sighted attention to relationships. According to Karenyi, Themis represents, quote, something that strives to grow, to ripen in time, and to which Zeus himself as a father is subordinate, unquote. This is important. He goes on to recognize the critical medial role of Prometheus in paving the way to what we might call the Theman order. Quote, according to Hesiod and Pindar, it is with Themis herself that Zeus celebrated the world-founding marriage that was to consolidate the world order and bring universal contentment. But the possibility of such a marriage he owed to Prometheus, who in the battle against the Titans had won his mother over to the side of Zeus, unquote. The founding marriage references the marriage of Zeus and Themis following the Titanomachia, the war between the Olympians and the Titans. Subordinate to Zeus? Not so. By most accounts, she was his counselor. In the big picture, Prometheus acts as a scouting vine on this primordial, rhizomic, and ultimately feminine truth represented in Gaia Themis, venturing into new paths to ensure the vitality of the organism. He, accompanied by tendrils represented in Themis' daughters by Zeus, the Horae. According to Karenyi, the Horae have both mythical and logically distilled principles. Phalo, or sprouting, auxo, growing, and carpo, ripening. These reflect a consciousness closer to nature-bound, mythological being in the world. Legality, eunomia, justice, dike, or dike, and ultimately, or cultural form of being in the world. This twofold nature reflects the Gaia, Earth, and a Themis, community culture, aspects of the Great Mother. According to Karenyi, Themis is also alluded to as Gaia's daughter. Either interpretation logically, if not ontologically, suggests a nature-culture co-presence,